Anakin was standing in the middle of Palpatine's office. The recent events were still rushing through his mind. As a Jedi, he was thought not to act impulsively, yet it felt so right. He didn't want to hold his emotions back anymore. He was always only held back by the Jedi's rules, and nothing can hold him back from saving Padme. Palpatine spoke with a relaxed tone. Every Jedi, including your friend, Obi-Wan Kenobi, is now an enemy of the Republic. Anakin's mind was a mess. His brains were filled with fog. He couldn't think straight. But still, Palpatine wasn't making any sense at all. He spoke. The Jedi in the temple, every Jedi, even younglings, they did nothing wrong. Palpatine looked down in disappointment. He explained that so they can be powerful enough to save Padme, compromises must be made. They need to eliminate all the Jedi, and only then will Anakin be powerful enough in the dark side to save his wife from a certain death. Anakin was silent, a confused look on his face. He put a little thought into his actions, and it was obvious. Palpatine was only plotting him against the Jedi. He cannot kill the innocent Padawans and younglings in the temple. So, he spoke that there has to be a different way to embrace the dark side. Palpatine was getting irritated, tired after years of deception, but he decided to put a mask on his face for one last time. He looked up at Anakin, a comforting look on his face, the one he perfected through his years of masterful manipulation. "Sit down, son," he said with a comforting voice. But he wasn't the man Anakin knew all those years anymore. His face was scarred and deformed, revealing his true nature. So Anakin just stood there, a tear draining down his cheek. Palpatine was getting annoyed. He stood up, taking small steps towards Anakin, when a lightsaber ignited. They both just stood there for a second. Anakin was confused, and Palpatine was just exhausted and unwilling to deal with the boy at the moment. It was obvious Anakin would not turn. He was a failed Sith, and also a fallen Jedi, unable to embrace a path, always creating his own. When Palpatine least expected it, Anakin swung at him. He dodged easily, but got increasingly irritated as soreness in his feet amplified. He wasn't young anymore, but he was still the Dark Lord of the Sith. Palpatine calmly made his way to his comlink on his table and contacted security. Then he said, with a malicious voice, "If you won't turn, then you will fall," before igniting his saber and lunging at Anakin. Palpatine pushed Anakin in a tight corridor, advancing with all his fury, knowing he won't have to keep this up for much longer. Security will arrive any moment now. A few seconds later, Royal Guards and the Coruscant Guard lunged through the door, their blasters set on stun. They shot at Anakin, but at the last moment, Anakin dodged the incoming attack. He was so focused on Palpatine, he barely noticed the arrival of security forces. But then Palpatine released lightning from his fingers. It hit Anakin on his back, and he fell to the ground. Security forces knocked him out and carried him out of Palpatine's quarters. Palpatine was disappointed. He should have known this would happen. Skywalker has nonetheless always been a disappointment. Good only for battle. Just like clones. He made his way to the Central Communications computer and executed Order 66. Jedi throughout the galaxy fell. Operation Nightfall was executed, only this time without General Skywalker leading clones as Palpatine originally planned. The Jedi were falling rapidly. Obi-Wan and Yoda were the only Council survivors. They regrouped on Bail's ship and decided to infiltrate the temple to warn any survivors not to come back to Coruscant. In the coming days, Palpatine took control of the galaxy, reshaping the democracy into a complete dictatorship. He was busy, no doubt, but he still had time to fly to Mustafar every day, where he tortured Anakin. After Order 66, he went to Mustafar to deal with the Separatist leaders and shut down the CIS army. He imprisoned Anakin deep under his castle in a torture chamber. Just like Plagueis, he also had a use for a test subject strong in the Force. Differently from Plagueis, he won't try to heal anyone but himself. Palpatine had been studying essence transfer, but it had been more difficult than he initially predicted. He needs Anakin to get weaker, his body deteriorating enough to hurt his mind, but not the Emperor's new vessel. In the following days, Obi-Wan met with Padme and told her that Anakin probably died in the Jedi Temple. He couldn't find him on security footage, nor could he find his body, but he didn't want to give Padme false hope. He mentioned that since almost every Jedi in the galaxy is dead, Anakin's children will be crucial for the future of the Jedi Order. He suggested that they both flee to Alderaan, where Padme can raise the kids under the protection of Bail and him. Padme initially refused, determined to find Anakin, but deep down, she knew that was the correct thing to do. She didn't want her kids to grow up as Jedi in the galaxy that actively hunts them down, but she knew she's better off with Obi-Wan than on her own. So, while Yoda decided to go into exile on Dagobah, Padme and Obi-Wan traveled to Alderaan, where they met with Bail, who was more than happy to provide them with shelter and security. Padme would give birth to twins here, dedicating herself to being a good mother. Obi-Wan would watch them closely, although sometimes he would travel back to Coruscant. His excuse was that he was searching for Anakin, but in reality, he was mostly just grieving. He watched the destruction of the Order, now renovated into the Imperial Palace, talked to veterans of the war now homeless, and sometimes went for a drink, but not with Dex. He cannot put anyone else in danger. Anyone who knows him will actively be hunted down and killed by the Empire. Soon, Obi-Wan would also encounter Ahsoka. He heard rumors of a Togruta fighting crime in the area around the Imperial Palace. Obi-Wan started taking longer trips, waiting to encounter Ahsoka, waiting for the Force to bring them together. Until eventually, one day Obi-Wan was walking in a tight valley when he saw two Rodians robbing a young human female. Before he could interfere, a hooded figure jumped before him, knocking one Rodian out cold while the other one ran. The figure turned, revealing Ahsoka's face. They just stood there for a second in shock. Ahsoka spoke first, saying that they should probably go for a drink. Obi-Wan said that two Jedi in a bar, in the middle of the Senate District in these times, is pushing it. Ahsoka just asked what they have to lose. Obi-Wan didn't speak, but it was obvious he definitely did have something to lose. Ahsoka's mind raced with possibilities. Eventually she just asked, "Is Anakin alive?" Obi-Wan's face got serious. He said he doesn't know, but his children are. Ahsoka's heart stopped for a second. For the first time in months, she actually felt a glimpse of excitement. So they went for a drink, catching up and reflecting on the war and Order 66. Eventually, Obi-Wan offered her to go back with him to Alderaan. She initially refused, but Obi-Wan knew that eventually she would at least pay a visit to Padme and the kids. 3 years later, Palpatine entered a dimly lit room. In the middle, Anakin hung, his expression cold, barely alive, his eyes dead, looking at Palpatine. Palpatine just looked at him in frustration. He's been trying to transfer his essence into Anakin for years now. No matter how exhausted Anakin's mind got, he didn't break. He didn't know if Anakin was just that powerful and tough, or if he was just not nearly as powerful as he thought. Neither of the two possibilities was very flattering. He figured that eventually, Anakin would have to break. He has time, and Anakin does not. There are limits to how far he can be pushed before he inevitably breaks. But unknown to Palpatine, Anakin was stronger than ever. His desperate need to find Padme and the child kept him strong all of those years. In all of that time, he meditated, reaching a state unknown to most Jedi and also Palpatine. He was communicating with Qui-Gon, controlling the Force at much higher levels than Palpatine ever could. In a sense, he was controlling the fabric of the space around him itself. But more than with Qui-Gon, he spent time with another entity in the Force. He didn't know exactly what that entity even was. It was different from Qui-Gon. It was almost more whole, in a sense. Not as a formatted person, it was more like a blueprint. The ghost wasn't alive. It was just pure energy, perfectly balanced between the light and the dark side of the Force. It reminded Anakin of the Father, the perfectly balanced entity he met on Mortis. But this was not him. The entity was full of emotion, full of anger, but also peace, serenity, but also passion, perfectly balancing the light and the dark. Anakin had no idea what the entity was. All he knew was that it was called Revan. Through the years, Anakin started to perfectly communicate with it. Not in words, but it was more of an immediate understanding. Instead of communicating, he could tap into the entity's memories and experiences. From what he could gather, it was also once trapped before it found peace. And as he figured out, the entity could help him reach his full potential. Anakin was living in a different world, completely disconnected from the physical reality. If Palpatine would have struck him down, he would have become more powerful than he could possibly imagine. Revan was transforming his understanding of the Force into a complete picture of reality. Anakin was completely ingrained in both the light and the dark, wielding both at command. And now looking back at his Jedi teachings, he couldn't help but laugh. Now he was miles above the mere shadow of himself he was years ago. He knew he could probably escape, but he kept learning about the Force until he felt like he couldn't learn anything more. He felt like even Master Yoda had nothing more to teach him. His plan now was simple: escape, kill Palpatine, destroy the Empire, and find Padme. So when Palpatine started to leave in disappointment again, Anakin got to work. He focused. From his fingers sprayed forks of lightning, destroying the force fields holding him hostage. He freed his skinny legs, but he could not walk. His legs could not support his weight, as small as it was. He was weak, but he was not hungry. In fact, he barely felt anything at all after all those years of torture. He reached into the physical force for the first time after so many years, lifting himself with the force. At that moment, Palpatine froze. He felt him. He felt Anakin, after all of those years. But his presence was different. His presence used to feel like a bomb, but now he felt like a cold dagger, coming for somebody. He turned, and the doors behind him exploded. In the air, Anakin levitated. His eyes closed. His limbs are thin. The two guards guarding the entrance fell to the ground, their necks snapping. Palpatine looked in horror as he saw the one he tortured for years coming for revenge. He desperately shot forks of lightning. Anakin lifted his hand, absorbing the lightning, and with a mild push, he sent Palpatine flying through the corridors. He landed hard, rolling, trying to regain balance. He looked up and saw the Chosen One slowly making his way towards him. For a second, he thought that all of this had to be a nightmare. He stood up and desperately started running. He felt Anakin trying to grab his neck, but Palpatine was just powerful enough to resist his grip, for now. Then he heard lightning. He turned, igniting his lightsaber, but the red forks of lightning came from all sides. Some burned his arms, some his legs. The one he could dodge caused him to lose the grip of his lightsaber. The lightsaber flew through the air. He really wished right now that he had brought his other saber. Anakin was approaching him. He started sprinting again. On the left and right, metal shrieked as it was torn off the corridor and sent flying towards the door, blocking the exit. Palpatine panicked. Anakin was now just meters away from him, not saying a word, just filled with purpose. Palpatine lifted his hand, desperately pushing Anakin back with all his strength, but all he could achieve was a light wind on Anakin's damaged robes. It was Anakin's turn now. He started walking again aggressively. Palpatine sprinted onward, jumping towards his lightsaber, landing on his knees, and turning around to ignite his lightsaber. But Anakin was gone. Suddenly, he felt a foot slam into his head. Anakin was behind him. He was lifted off the floor, unable to move. Anakin slowly paced the room. He grabbed Palpatine's lightsaber, examining the precise details on it. He paced again. Then he turned and threw the saber towards the Emperor. The saber spun, cutting him in half. The Emperor fell to the ground dead. Anakin grabbed the saber, turned it off, and hung it on his belt. Slowly but surely, he turned around, making his way towards the exit of the castle. It wasn't hard to escape. A few Sith cultists were blocking his way, but they were far from a challenge. He found a transport ship and left the planet. He set the coordinates for Alderaan. He could easily feel the exact location of every powerful being in the galaxy, including Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. On Alderaan, Padme was on a small balcony with Luke and Leia. Kids were old enough now to walk on their own and say a word or two. Not far away, Obi-Wan was meditating in his apartment. The ship took off right next to Padme's apartment, which was obviously illegal. Anakin made his way up the turbolift and stormed inside Padme's apartment. Behind the corner, Padme was standing, a blaster in her hand, trembling but all too willing to do what she must. She needed a second to realize who it was. Anakin, now for the first time in years, opened his eyes. They weren't blue anymore. They were white, dead, and blind. But still, Padme immediately recognized them. She was shocked, unable to move. Behind Anakin, a lightsaber ignited. He turned around to see Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was just as shocked as Padme. Nobody knew what to say. So Anakin spoke, his voice raspy, not really knowing if he even could talk after all this time. He said that all those years he's been imprisoned by Palpatine. He finally managed to take care of the Emperor. In the Force, he spoke with entities that changed him. He's not the same man Obi-Wan and Padme knew all of those years ago. He has to find his own way now. He's not the person Padme loved, nor is he Obi-Wan's brother anymore. He's just the Chosen One now. There was a long moment of silence before Anakin started making his way towards the tubolift. Obi-Wan tried to stop him, but Anakin was determined. This isn't his life anymore. Ahsoka arrived at the apartment a minute later. She just asked what she missed. Obi-Wan just replied in a sinister voice, "You have no idea." In the coming years, the rebellion started to become stronger and stronger. The matters escalated. When Luke and Leia were old enough, Obi-Wan started their training. Obi-Wan also took a trip to the Dagobah system, where he informed Yoda that the Emperor was dead, which Yoda, of course, already knew. Obi-Wan managed to convince him to come back to Alderaan with him, where they slowly but surely started making a plan to take down the Empire. Anakin traveled to a mysterious planet called Dromund Kaas, where he learned more about the entity he communicated with all that time. He learned about Revan and Vitiate, about the old Sith Empire, and how Revan was trapped and tortured for hundreds of years. At least someone had it harder than him. Anakin would never end up going back to Padme and Obi-Wan. He found his own path. The Empire would eventually fall. However, it would take decades until the war would finally end, and eventually Luke and Leia would find Anakin on Dantooine. Anakin was more than happy to tell them a few stories from the Clone Wars, and cleared some confusion. Luke and Leia came to a mutual understanding with him, and understood he could not return to Padme after all of that. The galaxy would eventually find peace once again under the new Jedi Order, led by Luke and Leia. And everything would be peaceful once more, at least until Yuuzhan Vong attacked, of course.